going to take a look at right now. We brought in a very special guest, Dr. Darrin Porcher. He is a former NYPD lieutenant. He also has military experience. He's been served in NYPD in many capacities throughout his career, and we want to get his take on what we saw and what happened there. Darrin, this just looked a lot different from what we've seen at other protests. Tell us what your thoughts are, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me as a guest. The uniqueness of this protest in particular was it was broadcast by the YouTuber that commissioned the event. And so this individual had brought in a series of people on the perspective of this being an anti-Mandani protest. However, because this was something that was online via social media, you then had a counter protest that existed where you had over 100 people that are counter protesters, and you had the 20 people that were enlisted with the initial YouTuber. The NYPD has a unit that works in tandem with social media in identifying potential protests and potential demonstrations in the city of New York. They've been far successful with this for years on end. However, it somewhat surprises me that they didn't create or present the resources necessary, such as the Strategic Response Group, SRG, which would be the subject matter experts as it relates to these levels of demonstrations. When Mandani was running for mayor, he made apply to the city of New York that he was going to dismantle SRG. So as a result, they went from 715 members down to 300 members, and the members of the SRG were not present as it related to that demonstration. The resource from the NYPD was somewhat limited. As a result, it became somewhat of a combustible situation, resulting in 2 individuals in possession of 2 IEDs, as well as those same 2 individuals having an additional ID in a vehicle that was parked a couple of blocks away. Granted, all 3 IEDs were recovered, but the level of omnipresence was non-existent in comparison to what we've seen in the past in the city of New York from the NYPD.
And Darrin, usually we'll see if they know about the Commissioner Tisch and the mayor said they knew about this protest, as you pointed out, a week in advance that this was going to happen with this individual, with Jake Lang, who has a large following. He's an influencer, far-right influencer. Mayor Mamdani called him Islamophobic, and that this was an anti-Islam event, and that was the whole focus of it. But the fact of the matter is they knew about this a week in advance, so I don't see barriers except for maybe the few that they have there around Gracie Mansion, for parking or whatever. Usually when they're expecting these big protests, they have areas. They'll have like a walk. You know how they do it. They'll have like a walkway set aside by barriers for residents and people on the sidewalk to pass through. They may limit traffic that's coming in to that particular block or whatever. There seems to be a more dedicated post, with police at specific posts to handle the crowd. But this just looked like they were there, and then all of a sudden, like a lot of people showed up, and because there was no SRG, they just could not get control of the situation. Is that accurate?
Lisa, you're very accurate in that, and it was clear that the NYPD was under-resourced as related to this demonstration. There are several components that come into play as it relates to these demonstrations. 1, the proper manpower, meaning the uniformed officers. 2, traffic agents, Department of Traffic agents that would be positioned at various intersections that would slow down or prohibit traffic from coming into a particular area. And 3, we would normally have a Department of Corrections bus that would be on scene for the processing of individuals that would potentially be taken into custody. These 3 components in tandem work as a deterrent as it relates to omnipresence from the perspective of people that are looking to protest and create a problematic environment. These things were not in play. As you mentioned, they knew about this in the past. As I mentioned, this was something that was broadcast by the person that commissioned the event. So we're going to conduct something referred to as an after-action review. What that after-action review is going to do is going to spotlight the deficiencies and what happened, and hopefully they can make the necessary adjustments, because New York City is a place that has the greatest propensity in the city, in the country, for these types of civil unrest and demonstrations. And hopefully they can get this right on the next encounter.
And Darrin, when you were a member of the U.S. Army, we thank you for your service. You were also stationed at certain points at the United Nations, which has been the scene of tremendous amount of protests. But tell us from the NYPD point of view, when the social media division, the detectives that monitor social media that you were talking about, when they learn that there's going to be an internet personality like this, for whatever reason, showing up, planning at an event, even if they're saying, oh, they're only going to come with 20 people or 50 people, or whatever, what kind of pre-planning would typically go on for something like this?
The NYPD's intelligence unit works in unison with the Chief of Patrol's office. And when I say the Chief of Patrol's officers, these are the traditional officers that you see that are in uniform, that are assigned to precincts. The two work in tandem to ensure that they have the appropriate staffing levels as it relates to these types of demonstrations. This is the natural order of business in the NYPD for years on end. However, it's unfortunate that there was a void here. And when you mention the United Nations, I mean, that's one of the more premier levels of a detail that the NYPD introduces thousands of officers to. But at the same token, this was Gracie Mansion. Gracie Mansion is the residence of New York City's mayor. So you would have thought that it would have been incumbent upon the powers that be to ensure that the appropriate resources and personnel were on the ground. This is one of the things that it was clearly amiss, and I'm hopeful that they can make the necessary adjustments moving forward, because we clearly saw individuals in a possession of 3 IEDs, 2 on their person, 1 in a vehicle, and had any of these combustible devices ignited, we would have had severe levels of casualties based on innocent New Yorkers that would have simply been at the location.
And this could have been much more this could have been a huge tragedy if those things had gone off.
That is correct. Generally speaking, when you have a situation like a demonstration at a VIP, meaning the mayor's residence, you have an assemblance of resources that I mentioned in the earlier part of the interview. But in addition to that, just when we have the New Year's Eve Times Square festive
Right,
environment
the ball
in
drop,
Times Square,
the big ball drop.
right? Well, there's a couple of things that also come into play with that, because we have the propensity for danger to over 1 million people. We'll have magnetometers there. The reason why I mentioned the magnetometers is because they have the ability to capture if there's any detection of a radioactive material or a combustive material at the location, and they would warn people. They'd have them walk through something similar to what you'd see maybe like in an airport, but it wouldn't be as extravagant as what you see in an airport with TSA. This is important because this translates to how you would provide or afford protections for the New York City mayor, because this is the highest elected official in the city of New York. We have something similar that we conduct whenever we have the UN General Assembly, as well as at Trump's residence at Trump Tower when he's in town. These things it seemed as if they were lost, and they were operated in a vacuum from a security perspective in terms of ensuring not just the safety of the mayor, but the residents that live in that location, as well as the individuals that were coming to protest for this particular event.
So if you were designing the security plan for an event like this, what would be the main key components or key pillars of it?
The first thing is we want to do an assessment of the social media. So when we look at the profile of the individual that was actually commissioning the event, he was one of the January 6th rioters, and his ideology was more so pro-Trump, anti-Islam. So we need to look to what fits the bill best in terms of the number of personnel for this type of demonstration. So you're going to have a series of cops that are going to be positioned from an omni presence perspective on these corners within, I want to say, right in front of Gracie Mansion, up to including possibly 2 blocks away. In addition to that, you want to marry in the technological innovation, such as the drone technology. We've had overwhelming success as it relates to drones in the NYPD. So it would be par for the course to have drones fly in the area, which would provide an identification of any possible disturbances that may exist in the crowd. In addition to that, you're going to have something we refer to as a reserve. The reserve officers are the officers that you don't see, that are blocks away, and they don't want to escalate the situation, so they feel it is best to have them a couple of blocks away. And if there's a situation that they need to respond to, then they'll respond accordingly. In addition to that, you had community affairs officers that were already on the ground, but the community affairs officers that you don't see oftentimes stay in connection with the intelligence component. When I say the intelligence component, meaning individuals that are in the street that have information that they can provide the police. This can be a germane component in getting information to officers that would lend them credence into this may be a person that has a propensity to enact danger. We may not have known who the opposing protesters would have been, but at the same token, oftentimes you will have people that protest in opposition that will post things online. So if that does happen, like I mentioned earlier, the NYPD does monitor social media. So when you have these components working in tandem, it creates a more robust security matrix to ensure that people are safe.
And you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned the drones, because we have seen the use of drones. They've used the drones successfully in the past to monitor situations before they got out of hand. And then also the reserve officers that you mentioned that are usually a couple of blocks away and can be mobilized very quickly if the need arises, or there's like a sudden burst of people that show up there unexpectedly.
Yeah, that is true. The one thing that I did see in the video was you had the Manhattan North Patrol Bureau commander that was on the scene. And so, from the perspective of him being there, I would have assumed that you would have had a lot more, or that would have been on a lot more boots on the ground, a lot more resources on the ground. And it's just more of a surprise than anything else. And I think a lot of this is a testament to Donnie, meaning our current mayor, had the belief of, look, he wanted limited policing on a city level. And I give you an example: the NYPD has faced an attrition rate of they're down 4,000 cops, and he doesn't anticipate backfilling those officer slots that have related to officers that either retired, moved on to other positions. So the NYPD is at a deficiency. So you have to marry in those additional resources, such as you mentioned, a drone, because a drone can cover far more space than an officer on foot could, as well as an officer in a police vehicle. But it's a questionable action on the part of the NYPD. And I think this could be a teachable moment for Mayor Mondani in understanding the dynamic of the security matrix that is sound and robust in order to keep us as New Yorkers safe. Because remember, this was at Gracie Mansion. Remember, if this was in another area in the city of New York that's not as resourced with police officers and cameras, this could have been a more greater combustible situation.
No, for sure. Darrin, can you stay with us a few more minutes? We're going to take a short break. We'll come right back and talk a little bit more, too, about what individuals, because I think this was a big wake-up call and making a lot of New Yorkers nervous. We'll talk about what people can do to stay safe as well in this changing threat environment. This is Newsroom Live. I'm Fox Local. I'm Lisa Evers. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Newsroom Live with Lisa. I'm Lisa Evers, Fox 5 News reporter, anchor, and host of the weekly show Street Soldiers here on Fox Local and on Fox 5. What we're focusing on is this attempted terror attack in New York City over the weekend, right at the doorstep of the mayor's official residence, of Mayor Mamdani's official residence at Gracie Mansion. 2 individuals have been arrested. They were arrested that day by the NYPD. And now we are learning, and we have some new information here, that of the federal charges that they are facing. These are images that you see right now on your screen. These are the new ones, Aisha? Yes. Okay, these are the new ones that are just coming into our newsroom from the federal complaint, which is to be unsealed and to be revealed later on this afternoon, officially and publicly. Now, these 2 individuals, 18-year-old Amir Balat of Langhorne, Pennsylvania, and 19-year-old Ibrahim Nick of Newton, Pennsylvania, they're accused of creating these devices and of attempting to engage in terrorist activity. Now, here's some of the charges: attempted provision of material support and resources to a designated foreign terrorist organization, use of a weapon of mass destruction, transportation of explosive materials, interstate transportation and receipt of explosives, and unlawful possession of destructive devices. So a lot going on here. This has now become a federal case in the United States District Court, the Southern District of New York. This is the same federal district in New York where we saw the Diddy trial last year. It's the same federal court where we saw the former leader of Venezuela, Maduro, where he and his wife were brought in to face the music there and face the judge. And, you know, the FBI is the lead investigator. So we're following this very, very closely. Darrin, your reaction when you hear that these two individuals are facing, and still in their teens, are facing these terrorist charges?
It's understandable because when the two individuals taken into custody, one in particular stated or he pledged an allegiance to ISIS. So that's where we collapse into the terrorist related charges here. It's one of these things that the feds probably will work better because this investigation is not just going to end in New York, but it's going to go all the way back to Pennsylvania. So crossing state lines, the best place to introduce a prosecution of this matter would be in the Southern District. And the Southern District would be the federal jurisdiction that would handle that. And that falls under Jay Clayton. Jay Clayton is the U.S. attorney that would be responsible for prosecuting this case. I think that this should be a wake-up call to us as New Yorkers because oftentimes we had a slogan after 9/11, see something and say something. But however, as a common citizen, oftentimes you may feel a level of disarmament as it relates to looking at something that has a propensity for danger. So what do you do in a situation like that? So I give you this particular case where we had a demonstration. The best thing that you can do is speak to one of the officers that at the peripheral fringe of this particular demonstration. You don't call 911 because you have cops right there. You can literally give the information to the cop that's on the scene and they can be executed immediately, as opposed to if you call 911, it goes to a 911 operator. The 911 operator sends it to a 911 dispatcher. That 911 dispatcher communicates with the officers in the field, and that's how that individual is sent. Whereas if you already have the boots on the ground, speak to the cop that's directly on the scene, and he or she can interdict it as they see appropriate. We're talking about really dangerous people that are doing dangerous things as it relates to these IEDs. And oftentimes you can have somewhat of a level of chaos or confusion when you have something of this magnitude that's happening on the ground, and a cop just may not see it. Many times, what will normally happen is the officers will try to close in on whatever the disturbance may be as it relates to one of these demonstrations. But there was an IED that was thrown on the floor. When I say IED, meaning an explosive ordnance device.
And we're showing it, Darrin, and just so you know, we're showing, these are images that are just coming into our newsroom right now from the Southern District of New York. That's the federal district court jurisdiction that is looking at this. Look at these. There are screws in there. There's broken glass that's in there. There's metal in there. And according to authorities, there was a fuse. There was material that could also have fully ignited these things. Darrin, this was, for a lot of people, this was a very scary just realization that this was happening. The police commissioner saying it was not connected to Iran, but it was connected to ISIS. But in terms of these large gatherings, what should people know about them when they see them? Usually there's, like I said, there's like those, and there are those, there are barricades that are set up. There's like a walkway that's made available. There's traffic agents who are there to make sure the demonstration doesn't spill into the street and disrupt traffic or endanger pedestrians. What should people know? What should New Yorkers know as they go about this? And because clearly this is another example that we just can't let down our guard.
When you see something as a common New Yorker, report it to an officer that's on the scene. If you don't see an officer, then of course, you report it to 911. But we as New Yorkers are subject matter experts as it relates to seeing something that's out of place on the city streets. And I give you an example. Years ago, when I was in the NYPD, there was a smoking vehicle there was a vehicle that was parked in Times Square. And this vehicle that was parked in Times Square was in possession of an explosive ordinance. The vehicle started to smoke. There was a street vendor that reached out to a mounted officer, meaning an officer that was on horseback, and said, "Hey, look, go check this out." and the officer was able to bring in the resources, and we were able to terminate the threat. The reason why this is why I bring this up is because the street vendor knew and understood the dynamic of what traditionally is out of place and what's in place. You, as a New Yorker, you see something like this happening, such as an individual that throws the ID on the ground and it starts to roll. The cops may miss that. You point that out to the officers, and what you're doing is you're not just protecting yourself, but you're protecting all individuals in that area to ensure or support the safety for us as New Yorkers.
No, and I'm glad you brought up that incident, because it was the street vendor. Of course, the officers were heroes, to handle that and disarm that, but and secure the area from people. But the street vendor was the hero in that story, because, like you said, he's looking around. He's like, going, "Wait, a car on fire! Smoke coming out of a car here in Times Square," and alerted the authorities. So that's a very, very good. Very good advice. But what about like large crowds? Should people just be extra wary in large crowds? Because sometimes, you're walking through an area and the street's packed. You have to walk through people.
Right. Now, just because there's a large group of people, that doesn't necessarily mean that the individuals are embarking upon nefarious behavior. You're going to have to make an identification, and that identification should be supported by something that you saw that was wrong, whether it's an individual in possession of a firearm, whether there's a propensity for a dispute, whether there's something that you can clearly see that's either unlawful or disruptive behavior. Once you make that identification, that's when you let law enforcement know. So remember, it's not just because you see a large group, it's a large group that is committing to nefarious behavior.
And the way that they're acting and all of that.
That's correct. That's correct. Of course, if you see a firearm brandished, if you see a conflict between two individuals that seems as if it's an escalation, things to that effect. But remember, you as a New Yorker, you're the subject matter expert as it relates to what's out of place. And so use that psyche to your advantage and to us as other New Yorkers' advantage, and make the notification of police if you do see something that's not or out of whack, so to speak.
And then, Darrin, take us through the steps now. Do you think the police department's going to be reviewing this? They're going to be changing. They're going to be saying, wait a minute, we really do need extra officers, or we need to give people overtime in order to handle these things in the future? What do you think, given the current political landscape, what do you think is the most likely scenario moving forward?
Well, for starters, I think the reason why you didn't have the resources is because, as I mentioned, the mayor has been a critic of the NYPD as he was running on the trail to become elected to be the mayor, and reducing or keeping the number of officers in the department. Just as of recently, I want to say maybe the last few weeks, Mayor Mandani has spoken critically as it relates to the budget, and I believe he's stating that there's a $5 billion budget gap that needs to be closed. And there's been a series of alternatives that have been introduced as to how can we cut down the budget. Police overtime is always at the top of the food chain as it relates to cutting budgets. So an elected official may see that as the easiest avenue to address, but public safety is a significant component, and we need to uphold the social contract. So sometimes it may cost, the bill may go to the extremes, but at the same token, this is through the lens of focusing on keeping New Yorkers safe. So I truly believe that the overtime issue was the crux that caused them to have less personnel, as opposed to affording the additional resources of police officers, bringing in the wooden horses. When I say wooden horses, meaning the barricades, the wooden barricades, the medical barricades, to assist, to act as a deterrent of omnipresence.
And then the things that you mentioned too, that we would normally see that we did not see. We didn't see those, the SRG there. We didn't see the extra units that were blocks away to back it up. Certain missing things. If that game plan worked in the past, do you think they will return to that?
I'm a firm proponent as if it's
Not broke.
not broke, right? There's no need for you to fix it. And we've had tremendous success with the SRG, the Strategic Response Group, as it relates to interdicting these demonstrations, keeping a level of calm before it gets to that point. And if it does get to that point of being a combustible situation, no unit in the NYPD is better than SRG as it relates to containing these levels of disturbances. So you need to look to who the subject matter experts are. And if it's SRG, have those boots on the ground. They've been cut just under 60% as it relates to their manning because Mandani wants to eradicate the unit. It works. It's okay for you to make adjustments. That's fine. But when you look at it from the grand scheme of, let's look at this from a macro perspective, what works, you need to keep SRG as the players on the field.
Right, and thank God nobody was seriously injured, really. I mean, when you look at that, it's incredible. But Darrin, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me as a guest. Love the listeners, and be well and happy Monday.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Darrin Porcher, a former NYPD lieutenant and law enforcement analyst.